Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Petralia, Trags, and I'm back with the latest installment of the Code Reds podcast here on the CLNS Media Network. My pleasure to welcome back Trent Rosecrans of The Athletic, doing a fabulous job covering all things baseball and specifically your hometown Cincinnati Reds. Trent, how you doing?
It's not my hometown.
Well, that's right. Georgia?
We could call it that.
I
don't have one.
All right. Well, a man without a hometown still does a fabulous
I've lived
job.
here more than I've lived here like much longer than I've lived anywhere else. Shoot. I'm coming up on living here more than, I will say this. I've lived in Cincinnati longer than the rest of the places in the United States that I've lived combined.
Wow. So I've lived in Cincinnati equally as long as I have lived in because I was born and raised in Cincinnati, as I worked in Boston. So there.
Yeah.
Let's talk the Cincinnati Reds and how they are progressing in the 2025 spring training. I think there's a lot of positives going on, but to me still, it's going to be about the pitching staff, the health of the pitching staff, namely, going into the season. And what have been your impressions so far of, the top of the rotation pitchers like Hunter Greene, Nick Lodolo, and Nick Martinez? What have been your general takeaways just, 3 starts in or 4 starts in for each of them?
Yeah, I really like what I've seen from Hunter Greene. I know, like, spring numbers I don't care about, especially with older guys. But I just like the way he looks, the pitch mix, the kind of new things he's kind of worked on. I just think, he's coming into that spot really in the body. The body looks more solid, more like mature pitcher look, the lower half. I don't know. I keep thinking that, like, man, this could be the year that Hunter Greene is the guy. And, like, I don't mean for the Reds. I mean one of the guys in baseball. And I mean, chances are he won't be, because that's a tough hill to climb. But I think there's a real possibility. Nick Lodolo, I love when he's on the mound. I love him. That's the thing. And then Nick Martinez, in spring, I don't care what he does. Nobody knows Nick Martinez in preparation better than Nick Martinez. He's one of those guys who's earned that. You hope to have like Brady Singer be Brady Singer, which is give you bulk innings, give you 5, 6 every 5 days, and take that. And then that last spot, I'm not concerned at all about Rhett Lauder's injury. And I think Andrew Abbott will be fine. And so you're kind of looking at some depth there right now. And so if Ashcraft starts in the rotation, give him that shot, then send him to the bullpen. And who's to say that he doesn't come back and take the Nick Martinez route? So again, it's all health. And I think for the offense, it's all health, because last year the offense was not healthy and we saw what we got.
Yeah. And I would tell you that in talking with, in interviewing Hunter Greene when he had his media availability early in spring training down in Goodyear, I asked him about the Cy Young, and his answer, he was giving, very verbose answers. He was very descriptive. But when I asked him that question, it was about a 6-second answer, I think. And he said, you know what? Numbers will take care of themselves. Of course, I think about it, but I'm not going to worry about it. And there was an air about him, a confidence. And I wouldn't say arrogance, but it's like he is approaching the supreme confidence in knowing what he is. And like you said, Trent, I think the confidence in his body really maturing to the point where I think he thinks he can press the pedal for the whole season.
Yeah, and I mean, it's still something he has to do. He hasn't done it yet. But I certainly think it's possible. And you just kind of look at him like, okay, you've built it the right way. He looks like you're supposed to look. And I mean, that may sound very vague, but I think there is an eye test there that he is passing, and that's not his ability, it's his where he is. And so I think that's nothing but a positive.
I want to get to some of the injuries, too, of which you already referenced. Rhett Lauder, his elbow, you're not that overly concerned about it. Andrew Abbott is in line to make his spring debut this week. And then there's Spencer Steer's shoulder. Where do you stand on that?
I've been back in Cincinnati for the last week or so not exactly caught up other than what I've read from the other fine writers that are there at the time. That one concerns me a little bit just because here's a guy that you were counting on to play a couple different positions, and this then limits him. However, I can see like trying to get Spencer Steer healthy, maybe playing some first base, maybe just DHing because they have that position in the National League now, which is I'm still getting used to, and because I'm old, and so yes, but like I think there is. Anytime a guy's not playing in spring training, there is at least some level of concern.
So that is one of the reasons I think Gavin Lux becomes more critical to Terry Francona's plans in terms of his roster. Gavin Lux, I believe, is going to get a shot as we record this today against Colorado in the outfield, in left field. I think that'll be the first time this spring that Gavin Lux will be playing in the outfield. I think that pickup of Gavin Lux is going to be we all thought that it was going to be critical for Francona's flexibility, but in a particular situation like this where another versatile player like Spencer Steer might be unavailable, certainly in the field for a certain period of time, you want to lean on a guy that has World Series experience, can play a number of different positions. And Lux, again, you're right. I don't worry too much about the numbers, but from what I've seen and what I've read about him, I think he's fitting in pretty well.
Oh yeah, he fits in well, and he's going to hit. I believe that he can hit. Now, can he play? There's the difference between can he play multiple positions or can he stand at multiple spots on the field. Those are two very different things.
They are.
And I am not sold on how many places he can play on the field. So I still need to see, just for my own edification before I make any. That's not saying I don't think he can. It's just saying I don't know yet. I don't have enough information and I haven't been there, so I'm still behind. I've talked to some people who think they've been fine at third, and this is a team that, well, fine might be an improvement at some positions.
Well, yes,
but that's not the goal. And so I think there is something there. I think he'll hit. I don't know where he'll play. You do have the DH. So that's a very good thing to have for Gavin Lux. But we shall see. There's the corner outfielder spots and then there's the corner infield spots. And those have been the question marks throughout.
This is not a Cincinnati Reds podcast if we don't have the obligatory Elly is sensational. Elly De La Cruz is sensational reference and subject matter, and we're going to address that right now. Granted, spring numbers are spring numbers, but for Elly, they're pretty sensational. They pop off the page. He's slashing 526, 609, and 1158. He has 3 home runs, 7 RBIs. I don't know. I would say, Trent, 6 strikeouts and 23 plate appearances, but he has 4 walks. What is your read on those numbers?
I don't read into the numbers at all.
Nothing.
Especially, like spring, usually not, and especially a guy who's, listen, we know Elly De La Cruz is a big leaguer. Right now, I take nothing, especially early. Especially early, you see a lot of fastballs. It's just guys are pitching to get warm. They're not pitching to pitch. So I'm not going to read into any strikeout numbers, especially whether there's been improvements or not. I think there have been. I think you can tell it in his stroke, especially from the right side. You can see that he's kind of shortened things up a little bit. And I think the biggest thing is not really his swing. It's the decision making, and it's a lot of those strikeouts is against lesser pitchers when he was in the minors. He was able to do something with them. And it's learning, okay, was that because I missed, or is that because that's a pitch I shouldn't swing at? And I think that's what these last couple of years have been. And you can see a guy kind of making that progress, or maybe hope you're seeing that guy make that progress.
I think that one of the areas that I think a lot of fans, and I'm sure based on what he has read about his player, Terry Francona, wants to see from Elly De La Cruz is a maturity, is a development, growth in the field, and playing shortstop and fielding the balls that he gets to routinely and making the routine play. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I'd say it's exactly like you can take out, just copy and paste what I said about the strikeout numbers and put that to fielding. There are those plays that he could make in his sleep, and what can't he do? Here's my thing with Elly De La Cruz, and specifically the conversation around Elly De La Cruz. I think because he can do so much, and it becomes to be hyperbole when you're talking about what he can do, there is so much more focus than there should be on what he can't do or doesn't do. Probably doesn't is a better word, because I on a baseball field, I don't know what he can't do, but what he doesn't do and what he hasn't done. And for me, it just seems like I struggle with the conversation that is just like, oh man, if he just did this, well, what you got's pretty good. He was a 5-win player at 22 last year, or whatever it was, 23. That's really good. Maybe a 6-win, depending on where you look at it. That's phenomenal. And the fact that you're not saying, hey man, this guy is a 6-WAR ceiling. No, you almost feel like he's a 6-WAR floor. And that's ludicrous.
It is. It's unheard of.
And so what? Well, it's not unheard of. I mean, Mike Trout. You look at his number. Yeah, guys. It's special. Special is the word. And so I am so much less focused on what can't be done than I am what can be done.
What have been your impressions so far of Terry Francona, and what do you think in his evaluation so far of this ball club has surprised him? Something maybe he didn't expect, not only in the Cactus League games, but in the 10 days before the games began. You think he has been surprised or caught off guard by anything yet?
No, because I think he prepared enough. Maybe he was like, oh man, Matt McLean's shorter than I thought, but he's still taller than Pedroia. I think maybe there's one of those things that when you're around McLean, you kind of get it a little bit more. And he might see some of that he's not the, laser show outward displays that you saw with Pedroia. But I don't think he's any less focused. I don't think he's any less competitive. And it's just a different way of showing that. Matt shows it with being pretty flat, and so I think Tito knew pretty much what he was getting. He once he started looking at the Reds, he went all in and found a lot. I think maybe there's some things like also with Elly, you can see it. You can see everything he does on the field. Until you spend some time with Elly and talk to him and are around him more, partially because of the language barrier, partially because you're just so blinded by what else you see, I think he's seeing just what an intelligent person this is. Like, take baseball away. Elly De La Cruz is a really intelligent person. And it's one of those things that I think you have to see up close and be around to really pick up on the intellect that this guy has, in addition to all his obvious physical skills.
So I'm going to bring up a comparison with a player that he managed in Boston, and it's different position, entirely different position, and that's picture Pedro Martinez. I think when you got to know Pedro, Trent, you got to understand how very, very bright, borderline brilliant he is, how he was always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. And when you just mentioned that now, that name had not popped into my mind, because I have always thought David Ortiz, because of the personality, the charm, the charisma, the energy on the diamond. But when you say the intellect, and when you start speaking to him, how articulate he is, and how hard he's worked at the language, that's what Pedro was. That's exactly what Pedro was. And if you talk to anybody who covered Pedro Martinez back in the late 90s, obviously with Montreal and then with Boston, his English, he knew exactly what he was saying and how he wanted to say it. And that's what impresses me right now about Elly wanting to learn English. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And Pedro Martinez is maybe my favorite pitcher of all time. I adore Pedro Martinez. I remember this was the year that Ken Griffey Jr. got into the Hall of Fame. I'm in Cooperstown, and the night before the induction ceremony, they have this little reception that I was lucky enough to be in, like where I'm in line for a beer behind Cal Ripken Jr., that kind of thing. And I kind of get my beer, go find a corner to go into. But as I'm walking back, I look, and they're at a table is Pedro Martinez and Juan Marichal talking. And I'm just like, oh, to be a Spanish-speaking fly on the wall, just to hear that conversation. Like, you want to talk about two guys who just masters of the game. Pedro was like, it's funny, everybody always talks about like Greg Maddux, and Greg Maddux was phenomenal.
Right.
But like, and I think people underestimate Maddox's stuff, especially young Maddux. You know, when you're talking about velo, it may not have been 100, but he was at the top echelon of guys at the time. That kind of went down with age and whatever. And I think Pedro's stuff was so electric, people forget about the other parts. The pure pitcher. I mean, you think of, I'm sorry to get on this tangent, but you brought up.
Absolutely.
You think about the offensive era that Pedro Martinez not only played in, but dominated. He was dominant. I mean, it's ridiculous how good he was overall. Like, Bob Gibson, the 1.12, I'm not taking anything away from Bob Gibson. That's phenomenal. Nobody else has done it. Nobody did it then. Whatever. And I think it's awesome. Like, but Pedro, I'm pulling it up here.
Yep.
In 2000
is the year. I was just going to bring that up.
174. Actually, 99 could have been even better. Or wait, no, that's strikeouts. We're ERA plus. His ERA plus in 2000 was 291. Now, Bob Gibson, and again, I'm never going to say anything bad about Bob Gibson.
Right.
He's one of the greatest ever. But he, the 1.12 ERA, he did in the year of the pitcher, right?
68,
1968.
right? Yeah.
And so ERA plus is one of those things where it's relative to the league scoring in the league atmosphere. So it takes into account what everybody else is doing. And your ERA plus, 100 is average, and everything else is percentages above 100%. So you're 105 ERA plus, you're 5% better than the league. Bob Gibson, you're the pitcher, 1.12 ERA, hit a 258 ERA plus, which is just phenomenal, right? That's in the year of the pitcher. Year that everybody's great. He's 158% better. We're talking Pedro Martinez, 291.
He's almost 3 times better.
191% better than the average pitcher.
That's
it's as good as, and you
I think it's the greatest
run.
season of any pitcher, given the elements he was up against in the environment, the era he was pitching in. I'm sorry, you put it up against anything ever put out on the diamond.
97 through 2003. Okay. Jesus. I just did a quick baseball reference thing. From 1997 to 2003, he has a 2.13 ERA plus. Bob Gibson had, and again, Bob Gibson had 3 seasons in his career where he had an ERA plus better than 150. This is what? So 7 seasons. 7 of the greatest offensive seasons in baseball history for many reasons. And he put up a 2.2 ERA over 7 seasons, a 2.13 ERA, a 57.3 WAR. CC Sabathia, who just got into the Hall of Fame, and I voted for him. Let me see what his career WAR was 62.3 in 19 years.
So just for those who may or may not be, that's a cumulative
It's a counting stat. Yeah.
Correct. It's a counting cumulative stat. It's not that an average. It is actually, what you're saying is Pedro Martinez in 6 seasons, you said, Trent?
7.
Was 7. In 7 years, 7 seasons, was nearly the same great picture that CC Sabathia was in, what did you say, 18? 19 years.
He created as many wins in 7 years that a Hall of Famer created in 19.
That is
Relative.
that of all of the stats that you just brought up, and all due respect to Bob Gibson, the WAR stat comparing CC Sabathia to Pedro Martinez is the one that sticks out the most. I want to get back to the Reds here.
Sorry.
And oh no, believe me, I enjoy baseball history, Trent. I was like, okay, you take over the show because there's nothing more I like.
I talked to Barry Larkin someday about the 99 All-Star game.
Well, you know what? We're not going to advance onto the next subject. I was going to point out one more thing about Pedro Martinez in 2000. Understand, he did that almost half the year. He was injured. He was hurt. He was throwing through pain. Just on top of everything else that we just mentioned, another thing that makes Pedro is his fierce intensity and competitiveness through injury. And look, the All-Star game, the reason I bring this up, and Barry Larkin, he was one of the, how many straight?
Leadoff.
Yeah, leadoff hitter at Fenway.
It was 6 batters he faced, and I think he struck out 5.
5.
Right?
So I want to say it was Barry, I know Larry Walker.
Mm-hmm. I got the box score right here.
Yeah, take over. Yeah, please.
Let's see. I'm going to go down to play-by-play. Pedro Martinez, Barry Larkin strikeout swinging, Larry Walker strikeout looking, Sammy Sosa strikeout swinging. And then, interestingly enough, Curt Schilling started for the National League and gave up a couple runs. Then Pedro Martinez, Mark McGwire strikeout swinging, Matt Williams reached on E4, and then, oh God, this is Jeff Bagwell, double play, strikeout swinging, Matt Williams caught stealing second base. It was a 3-2 count with 1. Yeah, so, I mean.
That to me, and you and me have done our fair share of All-Star games. That's the singular greatest performance I ever saw in an All-Star game.
What's funny is, I was very, very young and early in my career. This was maybe the first big event I ever covered. And it was for a small paper. I don't even know why I was there, but thank God I was.
Right.
I remember, that is the day that everybody now, and I think a lot of people at the time, and I didn't see this because I didn't have the right perspective, people remember it mostly for Ted Williams coming out, which was phenomenal. And I was in right field in the Ox box. I remember writing I was right, but I think I picked the wrong thing. But my story or column was All-Star Game isn't about the game, it's about moments. And for me, it's what Pedro Martinez did. And to me, I wrote about how like everybody's going to remember Pedro, and I think they do. From the actual game of that game, because it was in Boston. He was a Red Sox. There was this, I don't know, kind of you could see the resurgence of the Red Sox at that time. Nomar Garciaparra was the young star. You could see that, hey, maybe they can get over the hump finally. And so I think that was a big part of it. And it just is, it's a transcendent moment in sports and one of the greatest performances. Because you and I grew up hearing about Carl Hubble going through the All-Stars and, Babe Ruth and the such. And I mean, you're talking guys who are just juiced to the hilt, and he's mowing them down.
Yeah, I tell you that I just remember Pedro gave it all that All-Star game, and he acknowledged years later that took something out of him, took a lot out of him, trying to get strike out everybody and go full bore. When he went into that All-Star game, not 100% healthy, not feeling like if it weren't Fenway Park, I remember him saying this, or it's to this extent, if it weren't Fenway, he probably would not have participated in that game. But it being what it was, he wanted to give it all for the Red Sox and Boston fans. But anyway, we do have to move on, and this is kind of maybe an appropriate segue, given the era we were just talking about. Your story on Noelvi Marte and his demotion to AAA, really not unexpected. I mean, I think we saw this at the beginning of spring training. And Terry Francona, one of the things I very much appreciate about covering him, he's really straightforward. If you ask him about a particular player in a particular situation and what that player has to do to earn a spot on his club. And he said, he made no bones about it, he's got a lot to earn, Noelvi Marte, after what he went through and how 2024 started and ended for Marte. You did a great story on The Athletic. What do you think, in talking to Noelvi and other people in the organization, what do you think, or where do you think he goes from here? How will he take his assignment to AAA Louisville?
I don't think he was surprised. Now, again, I didn't talk to him yesterday. I wasn't in Goodyear. That was an interview earlier, but like in that interview, I said, well, we talked about, because I think we all saw the writing on the wall, and he knew he was, I think Terry Francona, when, he did those meetings every day, I'm guessing he told Noelvi, listen, you're probably starting in Louisville. It's something that you have to accept and be fine with to go out and play your best. And so I think logically Noelvi knew that. Now, it hurts more when you go through it, and he didn't have the kind of spring that he had hoped for, but that's not important. It's not about, with young players, especially a player like Noelvi Marte, it is not about making the opening day roster. It's about, at the end of the season, proving yourself as a big leaguer. That you are a big leaguer at the end of the season is so much more important than whether you are at the start. And so I know opening day is a thing that we all circle on our calendars. We all look forward to, but it is still one of 162.
Yes.
And rosters are always going to have little things, either injuries, so somebody else has to come in, you need an outfielder, you need another reliever, or some starters probably going to start on the IL, and you can backdate it enough where you don't need that fifth starter until whenever. So do you have the 5 starters in the rotation? Opening days, like they're nice, and they're trivia, as in trivial, but trivia, and not, it doesn't have a whole lot of meaning other than one of 162. And so I think a lot of times we overlook that. And, it's kind of like what I was talking about with Louder. Louder, they wanted to slow play anyway, I think. Nobody's told me that exactly, but you want him at the end of the year, not at the beginning of the year. And I think with Noelvi Marte, the comp somebody gave me was Edwin Encarnacion, and Edwin Encarnacion of the Reds, not of the Blue Jays.
Right.
Super nice kid, great talent, unbelievable talent. And it took a while for Edwin to unlock what he could be. And even in Toronto, people forget, after the Reds traded him in 2009 in the Scott Rowland deal, and I think it was after that season or after the next season, he went on waivers and was claimed by the Giants. So he's briefly a Giant. And then because offseason waivers are what they are, he went back to Toronto. And that next year is when he became who he would be. And so I think there's a concerted effort of being like, hey, we watched Edwin struggle at the big league level. It killed his confidence. And he had to go somewhere else to regain that. And so I think there's a concerted effort to make sure that they get Noel V. Marte and not be like, oh man, you remember he was red? Like you did with Edwin Encarnacion. So I that may be me reading too much into it, but I know, there are a lot of people who are still in the organization from then and remember. And so I think that is kind of an important context to keep in mind.
And I think when you talk about a player like Noel V. Marte, he's got the raw physical tools. You know that. I mean, you can see that when you see him on a field. Like you said, and Trent, that's why I have you on, because your perspective is spot on. He needs to put it all together. And a guy like Edwin Encarnacion, we know what he became later in his career. The Reds, I don't think it's inaccurate to say the following. Edwin Encarnacion, Noel V. Marte, at his peak, if he plays to his potential, is better than anybody that the Reds have at a corner infield position, power-wise, with the notable exception, I think, possibly, of Christian Encarnacion Strand, who has, again, I think we haven't even gotten to him, and I wanted to get your quick take on CES and how he's looked in spring training this year. I think he's looked a lot better. But with Marte, if he plays to his potential, he is a dynamic star in the making.
All-star. Yeah.
Correct.
Like
I agree.
he has that ability, and I think the power was what we were sold early. But then when he came up, we saw the other parts of his game. And, we saw he was a lot faster than any of us expected. He was, that first year, he looked really good defensively. Last year, he did not. And I think he got a lot of things in his head, and it snowballed that pressure. Yeah. And so, there was part of that. And I think that's one of the things of why this team was really, it was going to take a whole lot for him to break camp with them. And it would take stuff that was beyond his control, quite honestly. There would have to be rash of injuries like there was last year. Who's to say there's not going to happen? You knock on wood and hope it doesn't. But that is a possibility. I don't think the plan was ever for him to start in the big leagues. It's a backup plan, but plan A was to, at the very least get a month in AAA and hope that he's the player that he has been in the past. And that leads him to a good path.
We'll wrap it up here with Trent Rosecrans of The Athletic, covering the Cincinnati Reds. Christian Encarnacion Strand, Matt McLain. Again, numbers don't matter, but the health does. To your eyes, and from what you've talked to people in the organization, they have to be pretty pleased that McLain and CES look the way they do early in spring.
Yeah, and CES, like, quite honestly, looked better at third than I expected. That's where he really impressed me. I will say this for everybody, including CES, Noel V. Marte. I already said it. There are times you see guys come into camp and you're like, oof, what'd you do? And there's like, were you hanging out with me all off season? Are you on my training regimen? And no, like to a man, I can't think of anybody who you didn't go, ooh, he looks better. I mean, look at Graham Ashcraft, Emilio Pagan, Jamer Candelario, Noel V. Marte, Christian Encarnacion,
Andrew Abbott.
Andrew Abbott. You go down the list. And everybody, Will Benson doesn't look any better because it's not possible.
No.
But for the most part, everybody looks like they're in very good shape. And it's not, that doesn't mean anything. Best shape of your life, whatever. A lot of that's eyewash. But you better be in shape. And so I don't care about best shape. I care about shape. And the shape is at least to my eye, has been pretty good. Like to a man, I can't think of anybody who you looked at him and go, oof. And there have been times we've seen it. Yeah.
Ask the people in Boston this spring about Rafael Devers.
Yeah.
And how he showed up, and he's yet to make his spring debut. And here we are on March 11th. He's going to make it, I guess, later this week. But, you don't need that, especially with a young team and a new manager coming in with expectations of making the postseason, period, end of story. You want a roster filled with guys that get it and understand the priority of conditioning.
And again, this is coming from you. I think a lot of that has to do with Terry Francona. These guys know what they're getting into, and this is a guy who's not going to. You know what? He doesn't. He will care about you and what you're going through, but in the end, he cares about you being on the field and doing your best.
Right,
and that's what matters.
That is a great spot to wrap this up on. Trent Rosecrans does a great job covering the Reds for The Athletic. Read all of his material there. Are you heading back to Arizona, by the way, or are you here for?
Yeah. No, I'm going to do the last week. I usually try to split it up where I do a lot at the beginning and then very little at the end, and split it into 2 trips.
Excellent. So we'll look for your stuff there. I'll have all my stuff on CLNS Cincy with a Y.com. Be sure to read up on the Reds at both locations. Until next time, he is C. Trent Rosecrans. My name is Mike Petralia Trags. Thanks for downloading this episode of the Code Reds podcast on the CLNS Media Network.